Hi, my name is Angela Jimenez. I'm a photographer and videographer based here in the Twin Cities. And Reverend Gia Star Brown asked me to take part in this project to share what I know from my own experience about how to have conversations and especially challenging conversations across difference. Um, I was hesitant to accept the invitation, for one, because I'm less comfortable being on this side of the camera, but honored to be asked and happy to share the experiences that I have and the things that I do know based on my background. So I'm recording this video in my office, so what you see behind me is the detritus of all my work and my books and things, and I guess it's a visual representation of the brain and the framework that I use when I go about the world and go about understanding other people as best as I can. So that's basically what I want to talk about today is kind of introduce you to the framework that I use for thinking about my work. And my work really is about telling the visual stories of people's lives. Sometimes it's my own life, sometimes it's the lives of people who I intersect with in my own experience, and sometimes it's really reaching across like chasms of understanding and experience and being entrusted to tell the stories of whose lives I have not lived and struggle to understand. So, Racing Age is the title of a book project I did about elder track and field athletes of retirement age and over who are still competing in the sport of track and field. And I'll talk about that project later. But I've always been drawn to people who are pushing the boundaries and defying stereotypes. I went to the University of Missouri Columbia, and it was founded by a man named Cliff Edom, the photojournalism program. And his maxim was show truth with a camera. Ideally, truth is a matter of personal integrity. And this was this lofty, wonderful statement that I really believed in, and I still do. It's just not an easy thing to do. What is truth? What is integrity? I think it took me about 10 years until I did a project where I really brought my full unified self to it, and it was documenting a lesbian subculture that I was really part of. Integrity. I like the second definition, the state of being whole and undivided. I had a professor in graduate school when I defended my project. She said, Angela, you've got to have integrity. And I feel like it's my koan, my mystical statement that I've tried to unravel for years and years and years, and I'm still seeking to do it. This is another image from that project about the subculture. It took me a long time to find my way back to doing work that really included my whole self, because how can you bring love? How can you bring your full self to the work that you do if you're denying part of yourself in the execution of that work? That's a tough question when it's weighed against some of the principles of journalism, which ask you to be a fair and equal observer of all types of human experience and to approach them without judgment. I love the Adrienne Rich quote, whatever is unnamed, undepicted in images, whatever is omitted from biography, censored in collections of letters, whatever is misnamed as something else, made difficult to come by, whatever is buried in the memory by the collapse of meaning under an inadequate or lying language, this will become not merely unspoken, but unspeakable. So representation is crucial. Honesty is crucial. Going into your own experience and into the world and saying, what is it that we don't see? That's what drove me in this project. And also the principle that your silence will not protect you, right? So if you have an identity or an experience that subjects you to oppression or discrimination or marginalization, sinking into that and being silent is ultimately not protection. So I came up through newspapers. I've been a freelancer. I freelanced in New York City for about 15 years. And what I've always loved about newspapers and been infuriated by at the same time is that it kind of moves at the pace of common public opinion. This was the headline when the Stonewall riots happened: 4 policemen hurt in a village raid. About 40 years later, I took this picture for the style section of the New York Times, and they ran it like 4 columns splashed across the page. It was a picture of the Dinah Shore weekend out in Palm Springs. It was a culture article about the lesbian party scene. It takes a long time for those things to evolve. And it's been an interesting place to observe how people's minds and attitudes and language can change, and how that in turn changes society. If it bleeds, it leads. This is one of the kind of harder edge adages in the newsroom. Do we go after stories just because of their salaciousness or their violence? And how do we stereotype the people that we cover? Part of the reason that I wanted to become a photographer, and the way that I was taught, was that our job was to cover the social justice movement and to be part of amplifying that voice. And the reality of trying to tell those stories is really complicated. Susan Sontag said, "To photograph is to appropriate the thing photographed. It means putting oneself into a certain relation to the world that feels like knowledge and therefore like power." It's powerful to work for the media. The media is very white. I'm a white person. Going out on the street, photographing Amadou Diallo's mother, coming to New York City to mourn with Sean Bell's family during a police brutality case there. Who am I in that moment? How can I carry her story with dignity? What is my responsibility to her story? What do I understand about it, and what do I not? I'm a member of the National Press Photographers Association, and the ethical statement that you have to sign to be a member is: be complete and provide context when photographing or recording subjects. Avoid stereotyping individuals and groups. Recognize and work to avoid presenting one's own bias in your work. But we all have bias. The pursuit of balance and equity in telling stories that seem to have just two sides is that sometimes you're validating a side of the story that you don't want to validate at all. And being a storyteller, sometimes what you have to realize is that it's not your story to tell, and it's time for you to move out of the way and let the people who have the lived experience tell the stories. Storytelling is so much more about listening and facilitating than it is about guiding or controlling the message, I think, when it's done right. And I'm on the path always of trying to learn how to move aside and step back from the entitlement. And that's a process. And maybe you have a process in your own work where you've been told that you're supposed to be front and center, and you need to figure out when to sit down and let others stand up and speak for themselves. Listening to stories and telling stories is also about the creation of empathy, the expanding of an understanding of what it is like to be in someone else's shoes. And I think of this pairing of pictures. This is looking at police officers descending upon protesters during a shutdown of the light rail in Minneapolis. And here's the subsequent arrest of one of the activists. It felt really different for her to be confronted with that scene than it was for me. Until lions have storytellers, tales of hunting will always glorify the hunter. An African proverb. Until the people who are affected by a situation have their own voice, the same narratives are always going to control the telling of that story. I think Diamond Reynolds is a really powerful example of somebody who took the tools that she had at her disposal into her own hands and told her own story to the world. It's kind of hard to talk about all this stuff, about all the ways in which you fail to live up to the ideals that you set out for yourself. I started to look for new things as my consciousness started to expand, looking for joy, looking for complexity, reading media critics like Regan Jackson. White bias is the standard for objectivity. Just sort of analyzing the world around me in a different way. So maybe that's one of the things that I think hard conversations are about. Pushing at the boundaries of comfort and deconstructing some of the things that you think you know for sure. This brings us back to the beginning and the Racing Age project I talked about for a moment at the start of this talk. This is a photo series and book that I did about competitive masters track and field athletes of retirement age and older. And I came to this project for really personal reasons. I was a athlete as a kid. This is me when I was a kid on the left, and on the right as a heptathlete on the track and field team at the University of Pennsylvania in college. And my dad took both of these pictures. My dad's name was Jacques. He was ordained a Catholic priest before he left, and he was a scholarly man who grew up in an immigrant family, and he had Parkinson's disease. And watching him grow older and more frail is what drew me to this project. I was really frustrated by thinking about aging as something that was just about decline and just about suffering. And I wanted to make the sort of images that I wanted to imagine about what growing older and aging could be like. I really loved the Absent Narratives workshop that I took at the Minnesota Humanities Center. This was a type of absent narrative, a story that was missing when I looked around the world, and I wanted to make it. I didn't feel like this was a story that was being told, this vision of age as something really vibrant and really wonderful. So I've actually been touring an exhibit around to senior centers and doing workshops where I bring questions into the room, mostly about aging. What was your greatest hope when you were young? What was your greatest fear? We sit in pairs and groups and ask each other questions about who we are, using age as a prism for understanding each other's lives. And that's what I did with this book project. I met people like Johnny Valian, who grew up in the segregated South before Title IX. And this amazing life story unfolded around being an athlete. And this essay that I wrote about her in the book was about her athletics, but it was about so much more. And that's the type of thing that really curious conversations can open up. What's your greatest hope as you grow old? What's your greatest fear? It's scary to sit in a room with people and really be honest and really allow yourself to answer those kinds of questions, especially when they're strangers. But you would be amazed at what that mutual vulnerability can do. So, in these workshops that I run, we actually bring a camera and we take photos of each other and then we print them out and we write our own stories all over them, and it's just very cool. Um, but I always, in those workshops, usually come out about my family. I have a gay family, I have a wife, we have a beautiful baby girl who's 2 years old. Her name is August Jane. And it's scary for me to do that. The people are older, and my stereotype is that they're going to be homophobic and not accept me. But I model that in the beginning of those workshops, that we're going to talk about real things. What or where is home to you? I guess I think that being able to have conversations across a lot of difference are really beautiful when the conversation can range beyond, for example, my sexuality in that context. I'm a gay person. I'm fine. I'm comfortable talking about it. But you can't deny me my humanity when you know about my life. I'm a whole person. I'm a whole human person. I have relationships. I have love. I have loss, just like you do. I have lots of things that make me singular and make me special. But I met people doing this project who probably didn't know any gay people and didn't always know how to react to me and my family. But my family is everything to me. It's one of my identities in life that gives my life value. And if I can't go into a documentary situation or an art project and bring my full self, then I can't offer the love and the empathy and the understanding that I want to offer if it's not being offered at all to me. I think it's too tall in order to ask somebody to do that. And there are probably ways in which I'm not offering that same empathy to the people that I meet. And I need to change that. So I suppose my regret in this conversation is that it's not a conversation, it's a monologue, so I can't hear from you. But I'm going to leave you with some question prompts to think about for yourself and to also use in dialogue with people in your community, even and maybe even especially people who you think you already know. These aren't the kind of conversations we always have with each other, really getting beyond the way we usually frame our curiosity. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your openness and for listening to this and for looking at these pictures.